This past Thursday, Thanksgiving Day, the lessons that we read were the final lessons in the 3-year cycle of readings of the church. We have Old Testament lessons, epistles, gospels for year A, year B, year C. It goes on like that, and we just finished up year C. So the last page of that book over there, the last page of the gospel book was done on Thanksgiving, and then this morning we did the first page for year A, beginning the cycle of again on the first Sunday of Advent, and it felt good. It felt like, like buying new pencils on Labor Day. In a way, that process, these readings, like the church year itself, is repetitive, is cyclic, and that teaches one aspect of our spirituality. It's like the seasons coming and going. It's like dying and rising, right? And yet within those cycles, the spiritual conception of time in Christianity is also linear, also progressive from the past to the future. In the scriptures, in our theology, in our worship, in our celebration of the seasons, even though they all come around again, they're marked by this sense of goal orientation. We're aiming at something. There's a beginning and an end, and we move from creation to fulfillment. And in between that time, history counts for us. In some ways, in ways that it doesn't count for some other spiritual traditions. The paradise of the Garden of Eden and the heaven of the kingdom of God are eternal in our understanding. They're outside of time. But our lives are time units. In some ways, we're time beings. Most of the important action of our religious lives is on this side of the boundary between eternity and time. The call of Abraham begins that tradition, marching out from Chaldea toward the promised land. It's a pilgrimage. And the second coming of Jesus awaits at the end of time. And so there's that aiming toward some goal. There's some sense of moving towards something. We're marching towards Zion. And that comes into particular view in Advent. It is the beginning of the church year. But its meaning is not just that. The word Advent means toward coming. The V-E-N-T part is part of Veneering, which means come in Latin, and ad means to or toward. So it's toward the coming, looking toward the coming. And inevitably, that looking forward in Advent got connected with Christmas. Not too much the shopping season that begins a little earlier than Advent nowadays, but it's focused on Christmas, and even our lessons start to bring in Christmas themes. But Advent originally, as a season, was meant to look toward the second coming of Christ, not the first coming, and has that sense of culmination. The original celebration of Advent was somber. It was a purple season. It realized that part of that end times was a sense of judgment. It's the achievement of the goal. It's the culmination of God's creation project. that's definitely what the lessons today point to. We'll see how they point to Christmas in next week, couple weeks. But even when you're focusing on this Christian idea of progress and goal orientation, and what are we aiming at? What are our individual lives aiming at? What is Christianity aiming at? There are a couple ways of interpreting it that have to do with a different idea of what that goal might be. Both share the idea of progress, both share the idea of a goal, both are working out salvation history, as it's called. But they've come to be interpreted in a couple different ways. The best known, I think at least, the place where the best known interpretation of the end times comes from is the teaching of St. Augustine, or at least the simplification of the teaching of St. Augustine. Augustine was a profoundly influential bishop in North Africa, in the Diocese of Hippo, which is in modern Libya in the north, and his writings influenced the development of the church. It influenced Protestantism as well as Catholicism. It influenced Lutheranism as well as Calvinism. I think actually Augustine could be said to have invented psychology. That's a different talk. Augustine's view of salvation, of the human condition, is always presented as the working out of the story of fall and redemption. Augustine starts with sin. He may not have invented original sin like he invented psychology, but he certainly was helpful in the process. For him, something bad happened in the garden, and human beings got kicked out. And he focuses on sex as the sign of the break, but it also can be seen as disobedience to God. It can also be seen as a human pride and taking over God's work of judgment, where we decide what's right and wrong. I talked about that last week a little bit. So we were lost. We lost something. We lost the great gift of unity with life and with God. And Augustine sees the work of Jesus, the sacrifice of Christ on the cross, as a process by which God makes up for that human failing. He says, we can't save ourselves. It's only grace that saves us. But in grace, God has come in the life of Christ, sacrificed himself on the cross, and healed the break that happened at those gates of Eden. So salvation for Augustine involves a kind of restoration of creation to the way it was supposed to be, an original blessing replacing original sin. But there was another view of this Advent goal of salvation history that was taught by a lesser-known bishop named Irenaeus. You may have heard of him, may not. He was bishop in Lyon, which is now part of modern-day France, and lived a couple hundred years, maybe a little less than that, before St. Augustine. And he spoke not so much about restoration as transformation. Augustine, there's a lot of other contrasts. Augustine was more Roman in his spirituality, which means more legalistic. Irenaeus was more Greek, which means more mystical. Augustine relied primarily on St. Paul. Irenaeus founded his views on St. John, the Gospel, and the letters. Augustine saw the kingdom of God as the same as the Garden of Eden. Heaven was the same as paradise. We just needed to get back there. But for Irenaeus, these two states of being were different. The origin was not the final state. Our leaving paradise, including the fall into sin and death, was a necessary step on our pilgrimage to the kingdom which lay ahead. The cross in this view was not so much taken as a substitutionary atonement as it was a symbol of the struggles that we all have in life, the coping with which leads us to our fulfillment in a way. It's only by facing and struggling with, wrestling with the challenges in life as well as the joys, that we co-create reality with God through the perspective of our life in time and space. So you don't end up back where you were. You don't end up sort of just erasing the whole problem. You begin and move on to a new state, a new life, a new way of being that may have been there all the time, is inherent in eternity, but which we can't see now. We represent in our Advent celebration Augustine's approach in our use of purple. It's the color associated with penance. We don't sing the Gloria, which is sung in other times of the year. And in a way, this marks the fact that at least as it evolved, Advent came to be seen as the preparation time for Christmas, just like Lent is seen as the preparation time for Easter. So it took on that similar dynamic. Irenaeus is represented here in some ways by the candles on the wreath and on the altar and in the sand for intercessory prayer back there. The coming of light into the darkness, which is our Christian work. A flickering hint of the glory yet to come. A flickering hint of a truth yet to be fully revealed. So you can look to the past or to the future for an Advent goal, restoration or transformation, the paradise of creation or the heaven of resurrection. But I also think there's a third option. I think you can stay right where you are and let Advent come to you. With all of this, we're struggling in Advent, we're working in Advent to connect time and eternity. That's what Advent's about. And from our perspective within history, it may look like going back to Eden, to the point of creation, or going ahead to the kingdom and the day of judgment. But if those are places of eternity, and God is eternal, eternity is all of it, that past and future. And it also includes here and now. If we think of God as only in paradise or only in heaven, then things aren't all right with the world, because that would mean God's not here. And the whole point of Jesus' life is to say that God is here. The Word became flesh and transformed material reality, in spite of what Paul might have said at the end of the letter today. Here and now is the only place we can meet God. Here and now is the point where our lives in history, as these time beings, intersects God's life which is eternity. It's that we're going along like this, and God's here, and the only place they intersect is right here, which is also the life of Jesus at the same time. If you can keep from being distracted, which I think is actually as good a translation of the word sin as any, being distracted from ultimate truth, you can begin to see the flow of spirit that connects all this, that connects the ever-present origin of life with what the Bible calls the fullness of time. And it can look sort of like, that symbol for infinity, which is like an 8 on its side. It goes like that. And right where they cross is your life, here and now. That's both in time and in eternity. Now, that's a hard thing to see. It's a hard thing to experience and realize. We may not see it yet. We may see it, as like Paul says, through a glass darkly, that every once in a while we get a hint that there's something more to our life than just putting in a day's work, going to bed, getting up, diverting ourselves. That there's something really, really important going on. But each week, this Advent, we'll light another candle. And if you're open to the light in your life, if you can pause and just be open to that sense of light coming into your life, then things could become more clear. And by Christmas Eve, when we use a lot of candles, you'll be ready for the Word to become flesh, in your life, to incarnate in your heart, in your soul, in your own single precious life, this amazing truth and spirit and life and love we discover in our relationship with God, and as we walk in the light. Thanks be to God.